America was supposed to throw itself the biggest birthday party in 250 years. A 16-day festival on the National Mall, 9 major musical acts, fireworks over Washington. The kind of spectacle that gets written into history books. Instead, what the country got was something far more chaotic, far more bizarre, and honestly, far more entertaining. Because within days of the lineup being announced, the whole thing collapsed. Artists started bolting. Accusations flew. A sitting president called musicians third-rate on social media. And then, in a plot twist that nobody saw coming, Donald Trump declared himself the headliner. This is the full story of how Freedom 250 became the most talked about train wreck in American entertainment history. Back in early 2026, the Trump administration was determined to make America's 250th birthday unforgettable. The concept was ambitious. A massive Great American State Fair, stretched across 16 days on the National Mall in Washington, D.C., running from June 25th all the way through July 10th. It would be patriotic, it would be massive, and it would have star power. The organizing body behind it all was called Freedom 250, a group that Trump himself created through an executive order specifically to plan and execute administration events, including the big birthday celebrations. This wasn't a private concert promoter or an independent production company. This was a government-adjacent initiative, born from a presidential penstroke, tasked with throwing the country a party it would never forget. And for a brief moment, it looked like they might actually pull it off. Freedom 250 announced a first round of entertainment that turned heads. 9 performers. A mix of classic acts and nostalgia favorites that, on paper, felt like a genuine attempt to pull in audiences across age groups and music tastes. The announcement was splashy, the language was confident, and the press coverage was relatively positive. But there was a problem brewing beneath the surface, one that would explode into public view faster than anyone at Freedom 250 anticipated. The 9 acts announced for the Freedom 250 Festival were a throwback lover's dream. Martina McBride, the country legend known for hits that defined a generation. Bret Michaels, the rock icon from Poison whose long career had made him a festival staple. Young MC, the hip-hop pioneer whose 1989 smash hit, Bust a Move, still gets crowds on their feet. C+C Music Factory, the dance pop act responsible for one of the most recognizable hooks of the early 90s. The Commodores, Motown royalty with decades of classics under their belt. Morris Day and The Time, the funk legends made famous in part by their connection to Prince. On paper, it read like a solid, crowd-pleasing lineup. Enough variety to appeal to a wide range of ages. Enough nostalgia to guarantee a certain level of buzz. But here's what none of these artists had apparently been told before they agreed to perform. The event was directly tied to Donald Trump and his administration. That detail, which might seem obvious in retrospect, given that the organizing body was literally created by a Trump executive order, apparently wasn't made clear to the artists or their teams when they were booked. And once that connection became public knowledge, the fallout was swift and severe. One by one, the cancellations started rolling in. Martina McBride was among the first to go public with her decision to drop out, and she made her reasoning crystal clear. She hadn't known about the event's ties to Trump when she agreed to perform. She hadn't signed up to be part of a political statement. She wasn't interested in being a prop in someone else's production without full transparency. Bret Michaels followed, with his camp issuing similar language. The booking had been misleading, the connection to the administration hadn't been disclosed up front, and performing under those circumstances wasn't something he was willing to do. Young MC pulled out. C+C Music Factory pulled out. The Commodores pulled out. Morris Day and The Time pulled out. 6 of the 9 original acts, more than half the entire lineup, were gone in a matter of days. The speed of it was breathtaking. What had been announced with fanfare and confidence was now hemorrhaging talent at an almost comical rate. An anonymous senior administration official, speaking to the New York Times, described the rollout with brutal honesty. Just 2 words: a mess. It was hard to argue. The backstage chaos was real. The PR damage was mounting. And the festival, which was supposed to be a symbol of national pride and celebration, was quickly becoming a punchline. But the story was far from over. When the dust settled on the initial wave of cancellations, 3 acts remained standing on the Freedom 250 roster. Vanilla Ice, Milli Vanilli, Flo Rida. The internet had thoughts. Vanilla Ice, the early 90s rap phenomenon behind Ice Ice Baby, has long embraced his status as a pop culture artifact, showing up at nostalgia events and keeping his brand alive through sheer force of personality. His willingness to stay on the bill surprised nobody who follows his career. Milli Vanilli, the act famously stripped of their Grammy after a lip-syncing scandal in 1990 and now operating as a revived project, also remained. Their continued presence at the festival sparked its own wave of commentary online, with many noting the particular irony of an act once accused of performing under false pretenses still being involved in an event already surrounded by accusations of misleading bookings. Flo Rida, the Florida rapper whose catalog of club hits has kept him relevant across multiple decades of pop music, rounded out the surviving trio. 3 acts, down from 9. For a 16-day festival on the National Mall of the United States of America, intended to celebrate the country's 250th birthday. The spectacle was just getting started. On May 30th, 2026, Donald Trump logged onto Truth Social, and the post that followed was something else entirely. He announced that he was considering canceling the musical performances altogether and replacing them with himself. "I understand artists are getting the yips having to do with their performance on Wednesday," Trump wrote. "So, I am thinking about bringing the #1 attraction anywhere in the world." He was referring to himself. The post didn't stop there. Trump went on to describe himself as the man who gets much larger audiences than Elvis in his prime, and he does so without a guitar. He called himself the man who loves our country more than anyone else. And then, in a line that immediately went viral, he referred to himself as someone who some say is the greatest president in history, the GOAT. He announced he was ordering my representatives to look at the feasibility of doing a rally in place of live music, essentially proposing to turn a birthday concert into a campaign-style political event. The reaction online was instant and enormous. Whether people found it inspiring or absurd largely depended on their political leanings, but the sheer audacity of the post, the Elvis comparison, the self-declared GOAT status, the exclamation points, made it impossible to ignore. And Trump wasn't done. Later that same day, Trump posted again. This time, the gloves were fully off. "We should have a giant Make America Great Again rally for 250 instead of having overpriced singers who nobody wants to hear, whose music is boring, and yet who do nothing but complain," he wrote. The musicians who had dropped out, artists with decades of success, Grammy nominations, and millions of devoted fans, were now being dismissed as overpriced, unwanted, and boring by the President of the United States on his personal social media platform. He went further, calling for a full cancellation of the Great American State Fair concerts, the festival he had created by executive order. The event his own administration had spent months planning. "Cancel it," he wrote. The pivot was breathtaking in its speed. Within the span of a single day, the president had gone from announcing the festival's headliners to publicly demanding it be scrapped in favor of a political rally. But there was one more element Trump wove into his posts, a reference to an entirely separate controversy that had been unfolding simultaneously. In the middle of his Truth Social posts about Freedom 250, Trump made a pointed comparison to the Kennedy Center, and it revealed just how much the broader cultural battles of his presidency were bleeding into the festival drama. A federal judge had recently ruled that Trump's name had been illegally added to the John F. Kennedy Memorial Center for the Performing Arts. It was a significant legal setback and one that clearly stung. Trump used the Kennedy Center situation as a parallel to justify his call to cancel the Freedom 250 concerts, framing both situations as examples of forces conspiring against his cultural ambitions. He described the federal judge involved in the Kennedy Center ruling as highly conflicted and crooked, language consistent with his long-running pattern of publicly attacking members of the judiciary who rule against him. "Cancel it," he wrote of the concerts. "Just like I canceled my involvement with the failing and unsafe to be in Kennedy Center because a highly conflicted, crooked federal judge said that I should not be allowed to spend my time and money in order to make the center great again." The parenthetical logic was vintage Trump, connecting disparate events into a single narrative of grievance and resistance, framing each setback as an attack rather than a consequence. For observers watching both stories unfold simultaneously, the overlap was striking. Here was a president whose relationship with America's most prestigious cultural institutions, from the Kennedy Center to the National Mall itself, had become deeply, irreversibly complicated. By May 31st, 2026, the situation had crystallized into something that would have seemed unthinkable just 2 weeks earlier. Danielle Alvarez, an advisor for Freedom 250, confirmed to the Washington Post that Trump would now personally kick off the opening event for the festival. The president himself, not a musician, not a performer in any traditional sense, but the president, would take the stage on Wednesday, June 24th. One day before Martina McBride had originally been scheduled to perform. The man who had spent the previous 24 hours attacking the festival's artists, calling for the concerts to be canceled, and comparing himself to Elvis would now stand on the National Mall as the headline attraction for America's 250th birthday celebration. A Freedom 250 spokesperson had not responded to press inquiries as of May 31st. The White House offered no formal statement beyond what had already been shared on Truth Social. The #1 attraction anywhere in the world had his date. Step back from the noise for a second and look at what happened here. A government-organized festival, created by executive order to celebrate a once-in-a-generation national milestone, fell apart within days of its launch. More than half its booked artists claimed they'd been misled about the event's political connections, which raises serious questions about how the bookings were handled, what was disclosed, and whether this was a case of bad communication or something more deliberate. The artists who dropped out weren't radical political figures. Martina McBride, Bret the Commodores, these are mainstream, broadly appealing entertainers with fan bases that stretch across the political spectrum. Their departures weren't fringe protests. They were reflections of something deeper, a growing reluctance among public figures to lend their names and likenesses to events they perceive as politically charged without full transparency. And then there's Trump's response, which, regardless of where you stand politically, was extraordinary in its directness. He didn't issue a measured statement. He didn't have a spokesperson manage the messaging. He went to Truth Social, compared himself to Elvis, declared himself the greatest president in history, called the departing musicians boring and overpriced, demanded the concerts be canceled, and then agreed to show up himself. It was a masterclass in controlling a narrative, or at least ensuring that the narrative would be about him, no matter what. What's left is a festival that looks almost nothing like what it was supposed to be. 3 surviving musical acts. A presidential rally replacing what was meant to be a concert series. An anonymous administration official calling the whole thing a mess. America turns 250 this summer. It was supposed to go out with a bang. It might still, just not the kind anyone planned for. The real question isn't whether this festival will be remembered. It absolutely will be. The question is what it says about the state of American culture, politics, and spectacle in 2026, and whether the lines between those 3 things have become so blurred that nobody can tell them apart anymore.